the MTV generation. That was what attracted director Fritz Kiersch to a script that would come to be called Tuff Turf. Kiersch had just finished working on his first film, the adaptation of the Stephen King novel, Children of the Corn. The script for Tuff Turf was sort of a Romeo and Juliet tale. It was about a rich family who lost everything and had to move to a poorer section of town. Their teenage son falls for a girl on the wrong side of the tracks, which upsets her very possessive and very evil boyfriend. Since MTV launched in 1981, the director saw this as an opportunity to make a film that channeled that energy. He wanted to make the film a sort of rock and roll fable, something along the lines of West Side Story for the 80s. The director had two of his favorite films in mind that would influence Tuff Turf, Monty Walsh and A Clockwork Orange. They were planning on filming mostly in California, but their casting was coming out of New York. Casting sent the director an audition tape from a young unknown actor, Robert Downey Jr. He had only 2 credits to his name at that point, 1970's Pound, which was written and directed by his father, Robert Downey Sr., and the 1983 film, Baby It's You. He was auditioning for the lead, but the director felt he was completely wrong for that role. The director liked his smile and thought he would do a much better job as the sidekick Jimmy. They hired James Spader to play Morgan. He started acting in 1978 with Teammates, so this wouldn't be his first movie, but it would be his first lead. For the love interest, the casting agents were really pushing Kim Richards. Richards had been in the industry the longest. She was in a diaper commercial at 4 months old. After numerous TV shows like Nanny and the Professor, she landed the breakout role as Tia in the Disney classic Escape from Witch Mountain. She was also the little girl who gets shot in the John Carpenter film Assault on Precinct 13. The director liked her, and she was cast as Frankie. Paul Moniz was hired to play the lead villain Nick. At 29, he was the oldest cast member to be playing a teenager. Since one of the director's favorite movies was Monty Walsh, he was overjoyed to cast Matt Clark. Rounding out the cast was Olivia Barish as Ronnie and Kat Sassoon as Feather. Sassoon was the daughter of hairstylist Vidal Sassoon, and this was her first movie. They started filming in the summer of 1984. Since time was short, they planned on doing a 6-day-a-week shoot. They had their locations lined up, but they would be on a tight schedule. The high school they planned on using was located in Redondo Beach, California. It was a great location for a major reason. It was scheduled to be demolished. The positive side of this was that they were able to film and do whatever they wanted to the site during the filming. The downside was that the location was set to be demolished just a few days after they were done filming. So if they didn't get all their shots in time, they'd be screwed. Panchino Gomez, who played Mickey in Nick's gang, was an experienced graffiti artist. So he did all the graffiti in the film. From the beginning, the director was butting heads with one of the producers. The producer in question was also an accountant and was entirely money-focused. He had little time for art. Every time the director wanted to do something that might cost a little more, the producer shot it down. The producer also had problems with things that fell outside of normal Hollywood conventions. For example, there was a scene where Morgan was being surrounded by the bad kids. He wanted to shoot that in first person with a moving camera to highlight the tension and make the audience uneasy. The producer didn't like it because he said the audience wouldn't understand if they didn't see the actor. Many of the interiors were actual locations, such as Morgan's house. This made the scenes difficult to film because there were no breakout walls, and they had to cram everything into these tiny rooms. The scene where Frankie's putting on her makeup was inside one of the houses they were filming in. Since the room was so small and cramped, they had to be clever with how to hide the cameras. They placed the pages from women's magazines on the mirror to block the reflection of the cameras. The burger joint was Sandy's Charburger in North Hollywood. The warehouse was an empty location in downtown LA. Since the movie was going to have a heavy musical vibe, the director wanted to include some musical acts in the production. The director approached musician Jim Carroll about performing in the film, as well as lending some of his music to the soundtrack. Carroll agreed on one condition, that he have a scene where he acts. Kiersch had no problem with this, and included a small scene where Carroll would be chatting with Jimmy. When they weren't filming, Jim Carroll was telling stories of hanging out with Lou Reed and Andy Warhol in the 70s. The choreographer for the film was Bob Banas, who was Joy Boy in West Side Story. For the big dance sequence in the warehouse, Bob Banas mixed professional dancers in with the extras. You can pretty much tell which is which. The director worked with the choreographer to develop a scene where Frankie takes Morgan to a place that was like a 60s nightclub. For the scene, the director hired one of his favorite bands, Jack Mack and the Heart Attack. They were very popular in LA at the time, and he felt they had the right vibe to go with the movie. He wanted to have a big up-tempo scene that looked like an MTV video. A mistake the director made was with the car. He wanted the Camaro to have its headlights and grille covered. He said this was to make the car look evil. Unfortunately, the director wasn't a car guy and had no idea that this would cause the car to overheat. So they were only able to get about 10 minutes out of it before the engine overheated, and they had to let it cool down. When Morgan's waiting to see the principal, he's holding On the Road by Jack Kerouac, one of the director's favorite books. The guy with the white guitar was one of the accountants on the movie, Ray Zimmerman. He had a band, JR and the Z-Man, which they used as the band that played in the snobby golf club. For the golf course, the exterior lead-up was the Thousand Oaks Golf Course, and the interior was the Riviera Country Club. They were running along with the shoot at the Riviera, so they had to do a night of pickup shots to get some additional filler. They built a wall and had the actors and some extras stand in front of it. They then had Robert Downey Jr. improv some jokes and a few other short clips. This presented another problem with the producer. After it becomes clear the group's going to be thrown out of the private club, Morgan rushes to play the piano. As it was originally written, he was going to have fun and play something lighthearted before getting removed. The producer vetoed this, saying in order to follow Hollywood conventions, here was the moment where the character would sing a love song. The director begrudgingly did the scene. There was another problem, though. Spader couldn't sing. They did auditions and found someone who could sing and sounded like what Spader would potentially sound like if he could. The singer was Paul Carney, the son of actor Art Carney. Later in the film, another problem. The sound recordist they had was working 2 jobs at the time. He was so tired, he accidentally recorded over all the audio for this scene. Since they couldn't go back and reshoot, they brought the actors in to re-record all their lines. Another addition from the producer was that the movie needed a love scene, so they put in a love scene and hired a body double for Kim Richards. Later in the film, there was a brief scene with an actor playing Robert Downey Jr.'s brother. One of the auditions they received was from an unknown actor named George Clooney. They liked him, but the director turned him down because he didn't look anything like Robert Downey Jr. Clooney went off to star in the hospital sitcom ER, and then years later starred in the hospital drama ER. When Nick's gang steals the Porsche, the director wanted the scene to be more extreme like A Clockwork Orange. The producer wouldn't allow it. There was a scene where Morgan was standing on a street corner smoking. The producer was furious. The hero doesn't smoke! So they had to cut around it so that it was very hard to see he's holding a cigarette. The director wanted the ending to have a dark noirish look, so he suggested they light the scene with car headlights. Again, the producer hated this idea and insisted they brightly light the warehouse, which took away the scary vibe the director wanted. While working on the end, the director wanted there to be a brief fight between Morgan and Nick so they'd have time to film a proper end sequence. The producer said no. He was a fan of the movie Carrie, and said the bad guy couldn't just be defeated. They had to give the illusion of him being down, but not out, and that he would come back for one final blow. This made it so they had to rework the end fight to make it take longer, which took additional time to film. They added in the extra parts where Morgan was fighting Nick up to the loft, where Nick gets a pipe and is knocked presumably to his death. All while the producer was shouting, "You have 20 minutes left! You have 5 minutes left!" After the time ran out, the crew came to the director and said, "We worked our hours, and the producer said he's not going to pay us if we do any overtime, so we're done." The director still had time to do some pickup shots, but not enough to do the ending he wanted. So with the pickups, they filmed the credit sequence of Morgan riding his bike around at night in Santa Monica. They did this without a permit, and got caught by the cops a few times. They then shot an ending to quickly wrap things up, where the kids go to the dance club to see Jack Mack and the heart attack. The director wanted to show what happened to the dad and give a little more resolution, but the producer wouldn't let him. With filming over, they moved into post. For the editor, the director hired Mark Grossman. Before he directed movies, Kiersch filmed TV commercials and frequently worked with Grossman, so he brought him back here. They edited the film to the beat of the music, so it would often play out like a series of montages, which enhanced the musical vibe they were going for. Since the film was aimed at teenagers, they were looking to make it PG-13. They sent it out for a rating, and it came back with an R. Rather than cut the film, they just released it with that rating. The movie was released on January 11th, 1985, and opened in 13th place. Word of mouth spread about the film, and roughly a month later, they increased the amount of theaters and it managed to hit the 4th spot on February 1st. In the end, it made about $9.3 million domestically. Many members of the cast and crew went on to much bigger things. Paul Moniz' stunt double was Spiro Razatos, who went on to be a very highly in-demand stunt coordinator, working in everything from Training Day to Captain America Civil War to The Fate of the Furious. After years of drug and alcohol abuse which ruined both his life and career, Robert Downey Jr. was able to clean up his act and has gone on to be one of the most successful actors in Hollywood. In a completely unrelated but no less interesting twist, at one point in the film there's the graffiti, "The New Avengers." Robert Downey Jr. went on to be Iron Man, and James Spader went on to be the voice of Ultron in Avengers: Age of Ultron. Paul Moniz quit acting shortly after the release of the movie and became a rabbi. He also wrote 2 Jean-Claude Van Damme films, Double Team and The Quest. Kim Richards' half-sister, Kathy Avazino, married Rick Hilton of the Hilton family, so Kim is the aunt of Paris Hilton. Kim Richards briefly left acting in 1985 shortly after the film was released. She returned to acting and has been in movies like Black Snake Moan and the reboot of the film that made her famous, Race to Witch Mountain. She was also in The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills for 10 years. The director continued working, making films like Winners Take All, Gore, and Into the Sun, with the last movie he directed being The Hunt in 2006. Tuff Turf's an entertaining spin on the Romeo and Juliet story. It's funny, I never thought of it that way until the director pointed it out. It's obvious now, but fairly subtle when watching the film. I liked the cast and had no problem believing in James Spader as the hero. Kim Richards was very pretty too, although I wonder how many times she sat on her own hair. It's a shame the director wasn't allowed to complete his vision of the film. I understand the producers are there to keep the spending from getting out of control, but in some cases, such as this one, they were interfering and changing the tone of the film to fit their own personal bias. I'll never understand studios that hire a director to do a job and then spend that entire production meddling with their ability to do that job. Although in the end, I still think the movie turned out well. It could have been a little darker, as the director wanted, and I think it would have been received better. The director wanted this to be a noirish teenage tale, which you can see in the opening. However, it quickly changes to brightly lit locations, which was another demand of the producer. At times it does feel like a music video, which in and of itself wasn't bad. It fit in nicely with the vibe of the movie. The film's achieved cult status, and a few years ago in a Toronto theater, they had a Tuff Turf night where they played the movie to a packed house and had a Skype Q&A with the director afterwards. I'm glad that it found its audience, and it even got a Blu-ray release a few years ago from Kino Lorber. Tuff Turf is an energetic, music-heavy film that works quite well. It would be an awesome double feature with another music-heavy rock and roll fable, Streets of Fire, which, coincidentally, also had Paul Moniz.